Way back in 1870, a gentleman by the name of John D. Rockefeller founded the Standard Oil Company in the United States. I'm sure you've heard of him. He did quite well out of his enterprise. In fact, it made him into America's first ever billionaire. At one point, he was apparently worth 2% of the entire country's economy. In 1940, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund was created with the stated mission to advance social change that contributes to a more just, sustainable and peaceful world. Then in 2014, in perhaps one of the most stunningly ironic acts of all time, the fund announced that it would be divesting all of its assets away from the very fossil fuel industry that made it its fortune in the first place. The president of the fund, Stephen Heinz, said, "We see this as both a moral imperative and an economic opportunity." It was an ethically courageous and noble gesture that, in all honesty, made not the blindest bit of difference to the amount of oil and gas that gets extracted each year. But what if all of us did it? I mean, not set up a multi-billion-dollar charitable foundation, obviously, nice work if you can get it. No, I mean, what if we all moved our money, such as it is, away from anything to do with fossil fuels? According to the Thinking Ahead Institute, there are about $48 trillion currently held in pension funds around the world, for example. And at any given time, there could be as much as 10% of that invested in oil and gas projects. That's roughly $5 trillion. Losing that economic crutch would be a bit of a blow to the oil and gas industry, don't you think? Hello, and welcome to Just Have a Think. If you've been a seriously steadfast supporter of this channel right back from when it got started in 2018, then you may be one of only about 2,000 or so people who watched a video I made on the subject of divestment around that time. I promised then that I'd produce a follow-up video, and it's only taken me about 7 years to get around to it, but I thought it might be highly relevant now as we enter one of the most dangerous and uncertain periods in the history of our species. In 2013, the Academy Award nominee Connie Field produced a brilliant documentary series for PBS called Have You Heard from Johannesburg. What's that got to do with anything, Dave, I hear you ask? Well, Field's films tell the story of how it was essentially economic divestment that brought about the end of the vicious apartheid regime in that country in the late 1980s. Here's how it went down. Way back in the early 70s, long before digital cameras and smartphones, Polaroid supplied an instant developing technology to the apartheid government. It was used to take photographs of every black person in the country. Back then, black people weren't recognised as South African citizens, and they had to carry their photographic identity passbooks at all times, or else risk a jail sentence. As you can imagine, the management of Polaroid back in the United States weren't overly keen on disclosing this business arrangement, but when two of their own employees, Caroline Hunter and Ken Williams, discovered what was going on, a protest movement was started that eventually led to Polaroid pulling out of South Africa altogether in November 1977. In those days, Polaroid was pretty much your only option for instant photographs, so it was a bit of a problem for the South African government. The departure of such a globally dominant company on essentially moral grounds marked the start of an overwhelming tidal wave of public protest against the regime. As a result, big important shareholders, including faith organisations, unions, universities and city councils, started divesting away from the powerful Western corporations that were still operating in that country. Back then, Barclays was the biggest high street bank in South Africa, funding many of the business and government activities in the country that exploited black workers. Barclays relied heavily on capturing new, potentially affluent customers as young as possible, typically during their university days, knowing full well that if they caught them young, there was a very strong chance they'd have them for life. In fact, in 1969, Barclays secured the accounts of 40% of all students. But as a result of the massive campaign to divest from the bank, thousands of students moved their accounts away from Barclays, and by 1986 that recruitment rate was down to only 13%, and Barclays was having to seriously consider their position. As a country, South Africa is blessed with many rich minerals and mineable resources, but it doesn't have any oil, so it has to import every drop it uses. In 1973, the United Nations passed an oil embargo against the apartheid regime, and despite 15 million tonnes of oil finding its way illegally into the country each year, the embargo still cost the South African economy $20 billion between 1979 and 1985, which just happened to be the exact amount of the foreign loans that the country was entirely reliant on for its survival. The divestment movement realised that if this funding could be cut off, then the country would either have to end apartheid or risk bankruptcy. All over the world, divestment protests grew and grew. Eventually, in 1985, the American bank Chase Manhattan assessed South Africa as being no longer investable and called in all the loans they had outstanding in the country. The rand plummeted on the news and the classic economic domino effect kicked in. The South African Treasury found it harder and harder to get hold of any dollars or Deutschmarks to trade internationally, and the game was almost up. 1986 saw the exodus of Coca-Cola, Goodyear, Kodak, General Motors, Ford, IBM, Exxon, and even Barclays themselves. By the time Nelson Mandela was released from prison in 1990, 155 US companies, 98 UK companies, and about another 100 or so from other parts of the world had all left South Africa. Apartheid legislation was abolished in 1991, and the biggest single factor affecting the change was divestment away from the country. The last president of the apartheid regime, F.W. de Klerk, said later, "When the divestment movement started, I knew apartheid had to end." So, systems can be peacefully changed if the will is there and collective action can be successfully mobilised. Presumably, Barclays Bank and Chase Manhattan both learnt an important lesson from their experiences in South Africa and now choose to steer clear of any questionable Oh no, silly me. They are in fact right up there in the top 10 biggest global financiers of fossil fuel expansion projects. Barclays funded more than $235 billion worth between 2016 and 2023, and Chase Manhattan, or JP Morgan Chase as they're now known, well, they're right at the top of the rotten tree, aren't they? Coming in at more than $430 billion over the same period. By the way, this league table is part of a global analysis called Banking on Climate Chaos, published in 2024 by a collective of several international action groups. There are way more stats in here than I could realistically fit into a 12 or 13 minute video, but I'll leave a link in the description section below so you can delve into it at your leisure. Here's a few numbers that jumped out of the pages though. The world's largest banks have invested almost $7 trillion into fossil fuel projects since the Paris Agreement in 2015. More than $3 trillion of that was specifically funneled into companies with publicly announced oil and gas expansion plans. 15.4% of that finance matures after 2030, which means it faces the risk of becoming a stranded asset, and almost 4% matures after 2050, which the report's authors say raises serious concerns about the issuers' and banks' climate commitments. The paper also points to multiple independent analyses confirming that no major oil and gas company has adopted a plan to transition their business models away from oil and gas expansion. A number of companies have even abandoned previous climate pledges since 2022, doubling down on oil and gas expansion to capitalise on higher returns in the sector. And no major oil and gas company is committed to ending new expansion beyond existing fields. Peer-reviewed research shows that the oil and gas industry has already invested in producing more oil and gas than can be burnt if humanity is to limit average global surface temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. The so-called Low Demand Illustrative Mitigation Pathway, or IMPLD, from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, avoids the unrealistic reliance on carbon capture and storage, or CCS, and the even less viable reliance on atmospheric carbon dioxide removal, or CDR. In that scenario, oil and gas production would need to decline by nearly 50% by 2030. According to this report, many big oil and gas companies have published misleading net zero emissions pledges that contain vast loopholes, like completely excluding the emissions from the end use of their products, despite the fact that over 85% of fossil fuel emissions come from customers burning the oil and gas that they sell. I could go on, but honestly we'd be here all day. I think you get the idea. So what can you and I do, and how can we do it? Well, I should make the obligatory statement at this stage that I am not a financial expert, and none of what I'm about to say should be construed as financial advice. But in terms of banking, you could do worse than visit a website called bank.green. Type in the country where you live, select your bank from the list of options over here, and then run a check on their investment activities. If you don't like what you read, then you might perhaps consider changing banks if your circumstances allow it. Over here in the UK, we've got a legally enshrined facility called the Current Account Switch Guarantee, which means all you have to do is apply to the bank you want to move to, and they'll do all the liaising with your existing bank to get all your direct debits and standing orders moved over. Simple. If you've got a pension pot, or if your company operates a pension scheme, which it should do, then do some digging to see if they're invested in fossil fuel projects. They almost certainly will be. Maybe have a look at online ethical pension advisors like The Path or Ethical Consumer to investigate where your hard-earned money can be invested without contributing to more oil and gas exploration. I've left some links in the description section below here for similar organisations in various countries around the world. Ultimately, whether we like it or not, in our global capitalist system, money talks, doesn't it? You may think your bank account or pension fund is just a drop in the ocean, but if hundreds of millions or even billions of individuals all voted with their feet, then real change really can happen. You might have other views, of course, or you may have some additional top tips that you can share with us all. Either way, the place to leave your thoughts, as always, is in the comment section below. That's it for this week though. Thanks as always to the amazing folks who support my work via Patreon and who enable me to keep ads and sponsorship messages out of your way. And I must just give a quick shout out to some folks who've joined recently with pledges of $10 or more a month. They are John Piccolini, Andrea Charlton, Demas, Adriana Althiel Archeron, Dylan Feldman, Lisa Leonard, John Breshak, Daniel Peruccio, Denise Draper, Andreas Sederoff, Terry Sloan and Andre Droxler. And of course a huge thank you to everyone else who's joined since last time too. Don't forget to jump over to patreon.com/justhavathink to find out how you can join them and have a look at all the exclusive perks you can get there, including free membership. And if you enjoyed this video, then you can really hugely support me by hitting the subscribe button on YouTube and clicking on all notifications. Won't cost you a penny to do that, and it's just a simple click away, either down there somewhere or on that icon there. Most important of all though, thanks very much for watching. Have a great week, and remember to just have a think. See you next week.